Hello, everybody, and welcome to Producing While Asian. This is your host, Don Mike Mendoza, and today's episode features Hope Villanueva. We spoke in August of 2020, and so we had a few hiccups with launching this series, not her fault, and that's why you're hearing this conversation now a year later. We get into her experiences as both a stage manager and as a writer, and what happened when she was involved with the company of Rock of Ages out of Las Vegas, featuring the late Nick Cordero. So we get into that and much more on today's conversation. So I hope you enjoy. Welcome to Producing While Asian. Hi, Hope. How are you today?
Hi, I am doing okay. It's a billion degrees outside today, so
Oh my gosh. I mean, summer doesn't really end till middle of
like
fall, right?
October,
So,
right?
yeah. So where are you coming to us from at this moment?
So I am currently up in Gaithersburg, just north of DC.
Awesome. So thank you so much for being here. You are my official second guest. And you know how kids say, like, first is the worst, second is the best. Don't tell Chil Kong.
Yeah.
But, I'm so happy you're here because you're offering a whole different perspective on your career and your story. So we'll just hop right into it. So tell me and tell us, what is your story in the theatrical industry? Like, how did you get into it? Where did you go? And how did you land at writer and in producing, or at least working on producing your own work?
So I sort of fell into this all by accident. This was never the plan. I was a dancer growing up, and my parents were not terribly supportive of that. They loved
Same.
the fact that I did it, did not want, they're like, that's not a real job. So I went off to college for biology, which I was also actually really good at. I do still to this day like science. I've tutored science, but found kind of late sophomore, early junior year ish, school was fine, but it was just fine. I wasn't happy. I wasn't enjoying it. I was sort of hitting a cap on what I could motivate myself to do. I was always a very hardworking student and tested well, and I was just sort of hitting this wall of where the motivation wasn't there. So I ended up switching majors to theater in my senior year of college and still graduated on time. Uh,
Nice.
so it was
That's
just,
awesome.
yeah, it was a whim. I had taken a playwriting class just for funsies. And then that way I took that course for the whole year, and that's what ended up motivating the change. So obviously, since I wasn't pursuing theater when I was younger, I got out of school with kind of minimal experience relative to a lot of my peers. So I ended up going down to Los Angeles and just being like, well, whatever y'all need, I'll do that. That's great. I ended up
That's great.
doing a lot of stage managing slash assistant directing on small shows, and lucked into the first director that hired me. I ended up doing 8 shows over the years with him, and he was just like, "You're really good at this," and was encouraging and taught me a whole ton of stuff. And that's kind of how I got into stage management. It very much was not the plan.
Yeah, because I was going to say the way I was introduced to you as a stage manager. So when you approached me as a writer, that was a whole new surprise for me. And so, yeah, tell me more
Yeah.
about that.
So like I was saying, I took that class in college,
Hmm.
and that was fabulous. I wrote a short musical during that time that ended up getting produced in town after college and after school. Paula Vogel was our visiting playwright that year, so I got to take a
Nice.
week of courses with Paula Vogel, and she is a goddess and amazing. Everything they say about her is absolutely true. She's
Cool.
ridiculous. But then, I got out of school and was doing sort of the stage management stuff, and I didn't write. I sort of stopped for a long time. And then in 2009, I got hired to stage manage at Honolulu Theater for Youth. So I ended up moving from California to Hawaii, which, hey, that's always a win.
Yeah.
So I moved for work, and the artistic director there is Eric Johnson, who's also fabulous. In just getting to know everybody, it comes out that I used to write a little bit. And he was like, "Oh, well, you should write something for. We're doing like a compilation show at the end of the year, and
Okay.
I'm gathering like all the writers in Hawaii to submit
Wow.
stuff." So he convinces me to do it,
Yeah.
and it's one of the 6 that are chosen, and that kind of
Cool.
kickstarted me back into writing. And funnily, that play is actually my one published play, the one that I wrote when I
Hey,
was in
one
Hawaii.
one is better than none. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And you have the little baby residual. It's only a 7-minute
Yeah.
play, so it's not very long. But every once in a while, I get the little like baby residual check. It's like, oh, someone liked my play. That's exciting.
That's awesome.
So yeah, that's what
Cool.
brought me back.
Awesome, awesome. So on the scale of one to producer, where would you land in there?
I think I'm probably like a 7 or an 8, maybe. I don't particularly like doing it.
Yeah,
It
it's a
it
lot.
it's a lot of work, and I'm used to the work because I'm a stage manager, so I'm good at the organizing and sort of the work level. But I find I can't be creative at the same time. So I've produced a show for the Fringe that was immersive here in DC. People loved it, but I hated the experience. It was just I was too mentally split, and it didn't work well
Yeah.
for me. And then now I sort of technically I'm a production manager for this youth musical
Hmm.
theater company here in town. So I'm technically not a producer, but it's a new company, so everyone's kind of in that,
Yeah,
pick up what you need to pick up to
right.
make it happen, right? So there's two of us at the head of that, and so I feel like I'm essentially a co-producer on that, and that, someday when the company is older and really stable and successful, I'll be able to back up and just be a production manager and not produce anymore.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you know how it is in the beginning. It's like you're all kind of all hands on deck, everybody, in front trying to make it happen.
Yeah, it has to be.
For sure. So, which theater company is that?
So this is the Free Theater. They're only 2 years old. And then I
Okay.
came in the middle of their first year. I was not part of the founding group, but they learned on their first show when they didn't have a production manager or someone with stage manager knowledge what a hot mess that is. And so
Yeah.
they were like, we need to hire someone. And it happened that I was available right around that time. So I've done 2 shows with them, one remotely because I was in Los Angeles last year. And then, of course, we were supposed to do Sweeney Todd this past spring, but
Uh,
COVID. So
yeah.
unfortunately, that did not happen.
Oh man, that would have been so good. Free Theater is Marcy Shago, right?
It is, yeah.
Awesome. So I
She's
was
my number one to my number two.
very cool. I was chatting with her, and she mentioned it, and so I definitely wanted to hear more about the company. So that's really awesome. It's just such a crazy time, like in our industry, and like
Yeah.
while we depend on the energy of being in a room with a lot of people and putting stuff in front of crowds, it's such a strange time for us. And so, how have you been? In your career, how have you been coping with that extremely fast, like overnight change in the last,
Yeah.
what, 5 months now,
Um,
I would say?
has it been that long already?
I
Gosh.
think so. Yeah.
Um,
March, August,
Something
eight,
like
five
that.
months.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. It's been a hard transition for me. I have been very fortunate as a stage manager in the last
Mhm.
handful of years. I was basically at one company for over 3 years, and that was my primary stage manager gig while still doing other things. And then I sort of broke through to a couple of companies year before last that I really wanted to work at, and finally was, getting those offers. So that was great. And then, wow, what's today's date? It's the 9th.
Oh man.
A year,
It's,
a year and 4 days ago.
oh
A
man.
year and four
Yeah.
days ago, I moved back to Los Angeles to production stage manage a new immersive production of Rock of Ages, the big Broadway show.
Mm-hmm.
I
Right.
toured with that show, so I am intimately familiar with it. And the Broadway director remembered me from the tour and
Yeah.
looped me in and invited me to put in to do it, and they hired me. So that's sort of the stage manager golden ticket, right? Is to have this show
Hmm.
that you work on from the origins
Right.
and build, and it's yours. So that's what I've been doing since last August, since about a year ago. And there were so many hurdles. There's too many stories of hilarious hurdles that don't have time for in 1 hour of interviewing. But everything from we were getting a brand new venue. It was a custom venue that was
Wow.
immersive. It was a bar. It was a full restaurant
That's so
built for
cool.
the show. And the set was purchased from the tour and being installed and
Oh
remodeled and
man.
refurbished for this venue. So it was like this was our baby. This is our space.
Yeah.
But permitting in Los Angeles ain't so much fun. So we kept getting delays from the city and from the building. So we'd rehearse for a while, and then they'd put us on a short hiatus, and we'd rehearse some more, and they'd put us on hiatus. Yeah, so it was just a very, very stressful time. But once it got up, it's such a fun show. And we were really getting our legs under us and our feet under us in terms
Hmm.
of getting grounded because it's a sit down production. It was meant to be there,
Yeah.
long, many years kind of thing. So we were really just getting our legs under us when COVID happened. And I had an apartment in LA.
Yeah.
So, I hung on to it for a little while because, in the beginning, we didn't know, is this going to be a month? Is this going to be 6 weeks? What's happening? So I held it. And it just happened that I had come home, like right then. I did a show on March the 8th. That was our Sunday night show. And I hopped on a plane back to DC because I was supposed to be in New York the following week to work on a reading of a new musical. And so I took the week off. It was the first break I had taken from work, actually. It was my first vacation. And so I came to DC to spend a couple days before I had to be in New York on Wednesday. But sure enough, Tuesday, all of the COVID news starts to break. By Tuesday night, I'm getting calls from the New York reading telling me, call all the out-of-towners and tell them not to get on planes to New York. We're canceling.
Wow.
So I happened to be home in DC when it all came down. And so I just stayed. I've been back to LA twice. I went back once just to check on things and bring my cat back because friends had been watching her.
Yeah.
And then again, I went back in May and closed out my apartment and let my apartment go. So the show is obviously down. And I was, again, in such a fortunate position that I was able to work on one show that paid for my life. I was set, but it's all gone now. So that's a reality. I know they want to bring it back, but who knows?
When is that going to happen, right?
And because of the type of show we are, I've seen drawings and photos of, okay, we're going to block out every third seat in the audience so that people are spaced out kind of thing. But that wouldn't work with our show because we're immersive.
Right.
And we're in, tables in a bar and everybody's meant to be right on top of each other. And our backstage is non-existent. There's a crossover in our backstage that I think is 18 inches wide.
Oh, wow.
Everyone is on top of each other. So until we have vaccine, it's not safe for our production to come back. And who knows, right? Like, we just don't know. And then, of course, we were hit with the extra whammy that so Dennis Dupree in the show is the character who owns the bar, for anyone who doesn't know Rock of Ages. And it was being played by Nick Cordero, who, if you are following Broadway circles in this COVID time, we lost about a month ago to COVID. He completely healthy when it happened, and then he was in the hospital for like almost 100 days. Yeah, so we're all we're dealing with that. There's a beautiful memorial being put together coming up.
54 Below, right?
That sounds right. There's whole different pieces because he knew so many people.
Yeah, right.
So I'm coordinating kind of the LA side of like making sure they know where to send their videos and all of that messages. So it's just on top of the work. It was, to lose a friend like that who's young and healthy and no pre-existing conditions, and there's no reason that it was so much worse for him, but it was, and that's a thing, a real thing. It's so many people I think are dealing with, the loss unexpectedly and suddenly because this virus's course is so unpredictable.
Totally. And just when you don't think you know someone, or somebody who knows someone, and it's it's just such a weird like connection. Like it's like a terrible game of Kevin Bacon. It's like this person knows this person who passed away or is sick from COVID or whichever. And I was lucky enough to see Nick in Bronx Tale, and he was awesome because of Sam Edgerly, right? Maybe he's like a DC native. But he was in the Broadway production with him. And so I went to see Sam, and I didn't know that Nick was in the show. And I was like, oh, that's great. And it's just a lot of like coincidental listenings of his work for me, where it's like, I am one of the people that likes Waitress a lot. And I was just, listening to it the other day and was like, oh yeah, this like song with the terrible guy who's like her ex-husband.
Yeah, with the horrible husband, right?
With the horrible husband. And I looked at my, phone and I'm like, oh my God, it's Nick. So it's really sad to lose somebody so young and so well known.
It's funny that you bring up Waitress, because I'd seen it. I saw it in New York.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until Nick had been sick for like well over a month that like I put one and one together and realized I'd seen him, because that was before I knew him.
That's awesome.
I know him as Nick backstage with the goofy
Right.
jokes, and you know,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's like, oh my gosh, I saw him in that show,
right.
and he was
Ah,
amazing.
man. Yeah,
He was
it's rough. So then just, connected to your production, it's like you've lost a lead now. And it's like, that whole process of finding whoever, when we can come back, what the new
right.
person is going to be or who it's going to be and
Yeah.
all that.
And there's
So,
so much psychological
mhm.
impact, that this cast, and anyone who does shows, I think, knows this, that like when a cast clicks and all
Yeah.
of a sudden, like, it feels like you've known each other for a lifetime. And this company was absolutely like that. With all the hurdles with the building and the delays, like, we just got
Yeah.
super, super close. And didn't hurt that everybody is amazing and nice and wonderful. So it was already a super, super close cast. And then you add to that, sorry, spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen Rock of Ages, at the end of the play, the dentist character dies and comes back as an angel at the end of the show. So that's the mental image I have of Nick.
Yeah.
Is him, he's a huge dude. He's like 6'5", in
Yeah.
like giant platform boots, white head to toe, crystals, and these like 7-foot angel wings and sunglasses and, a joint. Like that's how that character goes down. So, it's a wonderful mental picture that's how I remember Nick. But I question what will happen if the show goes back and we get to that moment in the show, and
Yeah.
like what does that, like, can we actually do that, like, without him?
Right.
Can
Yeah.
this group of humans do it emotionally? And we won't know until we know.
Sure. Definitely.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break, NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break, NBA podcast.
So this kind of web show, I guess, I created it because I wasn't, like you, I didn't start as a producer and I didn't know what that meant, nor did I know that this was something that I would want to become one day. And so in theater life, you go to school and you can get a degree or study production, but you don't ever go to school, well, not to my knowledge, to study being a producer. And the closest I got to that was being part of the Commercial Theater Institute in New York. And so I did their kind of intensive program March of 2019. But that was the closest I got to like a pseudo university experience of like, how do I do this? So that's why I'm creating this web show, because I would hope that this would be an awesome resource for somebody like you and me to go and, watch and learn, and, maybe it sparks them sooner. So for you, I would say, tell us from a production point of view, and, even relate it to your own work, like what kind of, I guess, advice from somebody who's kind of like me, baptized by fire, like what advice would you give to somebody who might be thinking about it, or, may have touched it but didn't realize it, but that they were producing things, kind of what's the raw advice you would give someone, just because it's so not like a course of study?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is true of a lot of things in the theatrical and
Mm-hmm.
entertainment industries, but the idea that whatever it is that you're going to make, whether that's producing, whether that's writing, whether that is as a performer, if you are going to make, not like you're being hired on to do a job, but
Right.
like you're going to make something, it has to be something that you would want to see yourself
Mm.
as an audience member. Because if you are not convinced that it is
Yeah.
valuable to see, it's going to be really hard for you to sell it to anybody else, to other producers to come on and bring you money, which obviously essential. It's going to be hard for you to pull audience and market the thing. So you need to make sure that you, above all people, believe in the project.
Gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. And I've definitely been in situations like that, not even as a producer, but like as a performer, where it's like you get into a show and you're like, I actually hate this. Like, well, but you're like contractually obligated and you're like, well, I have to do this. And you can't, you like, don't tell your friends. You're like, I'm just,
Right.
so it's like now I feel like when you're a producer, it's like tenfold that, because it's like, you did this. Like, you made this
Mhm.
happen. So if you can't,
And why did you bother if you're not excited about
right,
it?
exactly. So on that topic of making art and making new art, we both know, as people who are Filipino, that the movement of representation matters has been very strong for the last at least 4 or 5 years. And, we're kind of in this now because of what's happening in America. The pandemic, also connected to racial injustice, also connected to instability, et cetera, all of the things that give us anxiety. And so the recent movement, the We See You movement that's happening in Broadway, but also now in theater in general, what are your thoughts on that? Like, your opinion on that, and kind of, how can we all participate better to really help that along? Because I feel like, in a weird way, the pandemic is giving, well, fingers crossed, giving Broadway a really great, and theater in general, a great reset button to come back
Mhm.
better later. So talk to us about that and what you think of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right about that reset button thing. Like, at the very least, it is giving us reflection time.
Hmm.
And at the best, it's an opportunity to restructure the things that are perhaps not working. I think the whole concept behind this, we see you thing, it really kind of boils down to that there's just a whole chunk of society missing from the stories we tell. And that's brown people and black people and queer people and right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason, cough cough racism. Theater is super super white, and that is our history, and we have to acknowledge that that has been the case. It's very like AA, like
Yeah.
the first step is admitting you have a problem, and we do, and this is our chance to, like, slap each other in the face 2 or 3 times and
Right.
go, okay, stop. How do we fix it? And I have sort of split feelings on some of the how, because there are plays out there that are the quote unquote black plays, your August Wilsons, and for colored girls, the quote unquote black plays that get done during Black History Month
Right.
as sort of the
Right.
little showcase piece for a theater company that never ever casts black people. And you start to see that a little bit with Asian cultures, where it's like that play that is about this moment in Asian history.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost feel like we're past some of that. That, like, our next step, if we're trying to raise the importance of seeing people of all backgrounds and all colors and diversity, dot dot dot, then we have to not just see them inside that little bubble, right? Like,
Right.
Asian people exist in a world that includes other people who are not Asian. And Hispanic
Yeah.
people know people who are not Hispanic.
Also, like, not
So,
all Asians have magical powers, so there's that
I
too.
mean, I wish I did, but I don't, unfortunately. I didn't get that memo. So I'm more interested in how we tell stories that are the specific made universal. So, like, all right, let's say we're gonna recast Friends from the 90s, right?
Right.
Super white, hi. But it didn't have to be.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Right.
there's
It didn't.
nothing in there specifying that those characters are any ethnicity except, I think, Joey is Italian, because that's in the plot.
Right.
I don't know if the Jewish references came after or before casting. But, like, that could have been a very diverse circle of friends. So as we go forward, like, when I think about my group of friends, if I was going to write a play about my circle of friends, I think about my friend from Trinidad who is black and a poet, and, like, how brilliantly that character would speak. And then I think about my, like, quirky Northeast white friend who's a school teacher, and how fun and neurotic of a character she would be. Or I think about my friend Natalie, who is just like this Latina stubborn badass, really smarter than anybody else in the room. And, like, how do we bring all the different full humanities into play with each other to almost normalize diversity? And I'm probably not phrasing that real well.
Well,
But that, like, the world is all of us and
Right.
not any one group in isolation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that if we can
nobody lives
normalize
that
that,
way. Right.
Yeah, if you can normalize that in a movie or on TV or
Hmm.
in a play, then, oh, we are seeing that reflected back at us, and oh, that's normal,
Right.
and
And
then it can spread.
and also in the sense of like, if somebody is not your, well, what we've always been shown on TV, you're a straight white person, male or woman, it's the idea that if you do have somebody who is not that it's not a big deal. Like it's I
Oh,
you know, you get, I think we're at a point in our industry where if a character is gay, it's not, there's not a whole episode about like, oh, who are they sleeping with, it's just like, oh, they happen to like guys, it's mentioned in a, a conversation or something, and
yeah.
it's not, it's no
It's
longer like a big
true.
highlight. Right.
Right. Like I don't know if you've watched Kim's Convenience. I just started watching it
Yes.
recently.
Oh my gosh, that show
Delightful.
is
Anyone who
amazing.
hasn't watched Kim's
It's so
Convenience,
cute.
it's so adorable. I love it. But there's so the it centers around this Korean family in Canada who owns a convenience store. But when you look at their world,
Mhm.
the the dad is Korean, his two best friends are a Chinese guy who is single and a Indian guy.
Yeah.
And like mom is at the works at the church festivals and stuff with other Korean moms, but their pastor is black, and there's sort of the sweet, really really old lady, like, and
Yeah.
even the circle of friends of the younger characters, like our male lead, the son, is crushing on a white girl at work,
Hmm.
and the daughter has a white male roommate who is dating a black girl, like,
Right.
and it's just like, oh, these are all just like, look at all of the different peoples. And it's
Right.
delightful. And they're all just people. Like, it's very rare that the race of the person is part of the plot, unless someone has, stepped on someone's toes by accident, and then of
Right.
course it becomes
And I also appreciate how in that show, which I feel like producers should really think about this when they're choosing work that needs to be made. Like for example, the first episode of Kim's Convenience, where the dad comes up with a gay discount because it's
yeah.
Pride, and it's like the idea of there being issues between and just them as normal people, not necessarily saying like, look at these two minority groups going after each other. It's just that
Right.
no, this is an honest, straight store owner who thought having a gay discount would be a good idea because he just brought it up because somebody was being difficult in his store.
Right. Right.
And the rumor got out, and that's what it was. Had nothing to do with trying to be self-righteous about LGBTQ
Oh.
plus rights, like nothing like that. So
Yeah.
I
The
you know
humor
I
actually came from like him claiming he had good gaydar, and his gaydar was
Exactly.
terrible.
It was terrible. And so we're definitely in a place where we're seeing slowly more and more of that. So, I guess maybe in the future, like, so for you when you write, how do you ever keep producers in mind when you're writing a new show, or is that kind of like an afterthought?
I am very aware of producibility,
Hmm.
but I wouldn't say I entirely let it make the decisions for me. My muse is a very unruly creature and kind of does what it wants to do. But I do things like, so in my current play, a racist word is spray painted on the side of a building in the play. And so I know from putting on shows that that is a logistically challenging thing to do, night
Hmm.
after night after night, and that they paint over it later in the play. So it
Oh,
has to go through these
yeah.
technical incarnations, right? That's going to be a hurdle. So as I go through that play, I'm like, okay, that is the one difficult thing I'm going to hand you. And I'm not going
Yeah.
to layer on 20 other technically difficult things. So I do try to keep it reasonable. I tend to write for smaller casts, partially for producibility reasons, and partially it's just hard to keep track of a lot of characters, frankly.
Sure.
I have one big play that is, oh gosh, 10. I think it's probably easier with 11. And then I'm working on a musical that I think is 12. But I do know that in the current climate, pre-pandemic, and I'm sure it'll be true post-pandemic, you've got to pay those folks.
Hmm.
So cast size is a real thing. I do try to keep that in mind. But also the play demands what it demands. You know, there wasn't any other path for this current play to take other than this racist word was going to get spray painted on this building.
Sure.
Like, it is such a major plot point. That's just going to happen. And sorry, production team. Like,
You know what, they figure it out. You know,
exactly. They'll find a way.
If they could make Spider-Man fly around a theater, they can deal with a wall that needs to be painted over.
Absolutely. So you know, I do count it as one of the metrics, you know, as I create. But I try not to. I assume this is true for a lot of writers, but perhaps it's not. That, like, if you get too in your head about the nuts and bolts, especially in the early days, writer's block sets in real bad. So the freer you can leave yourself in those early phases, the more sane you come out the other end, I think.
Sure. I feel like, you know, you free write, just like free write what your story is in your head. And I feel like like you said, it's a metric, but, you know, you can always go back and edit later, you know,
right.
Like, get the story out first. So
yeah.
Awesome.
There's something to that. And there's, you know, I know there's a lot of people who will write an outline or whatever first, and I don't even do that. So it does come out really, really raw, and I do have to do a lot of heavy editing in those early days. It's just part of the process, and knowing that it is a process, right? Like, you're not going to sit down one day and 3 hours later you're going to have a play that's ready to produce. That's not how that goes down.
Right.
So,
for sure.
And that part of that journey is everybody else, is the director and the designers and the producers and all the people that hopefully are going to read your play and give you feedback, is all part of the journey of the play.
Totally.
For the Dennis Maniloff Show, I'll tap into my 40-plus years of following Cleveland sports and 30-plus years of writing and talking about them, so as to bring you informed opinions and analysis of your favorite players and teams. I also will monitor the national sports scene, and when warranted, step out of the toy department and into the real world. And I'll always be on the lookout for special guests. By all means, join us.
So, not asking for a solution, but we know that a producer of color, specifically a producer of AAPI identity, is very rare. How do you think we, you know, as people who are already in the industry, how can we find and encourage more people like us to get involved in that side? They don't necessarily have to become a producer, but how do we encourage and how do we inspire kind of the future cohorts of people like you and me to come forward? Because I feel like they exist, but they just don't know, you know, how. I know for me, like, for a while I felt a little imposter syndrome-y, unworthy of doing this job, just because I had never seen someone else, at least to my knowledge in my world, who was like me doing this. So what are your thoughts on that?
I totally think you're right about that. There's people out there. You know, I don't think there's a shortage of AAPI artists.
Right.
They're making work, and they're writing, and they're singing, and they're dancing, and they want to act. Crossing over into production is so specific, because I do think there's a lot of creative type people who don't have the planning organization type mind to make that jump without making themselves insane. So knowing whether or not you are that person is a great first step.
Sure.
But I do feel like we're in that question of gatekeepers, right? Like, if you think about the industry as like a bunch of pyramids next to each other, and the producer or the artistic director is the person sitting at the top of that pyramid, those people don't go away very often. So no one can move up until those people leave. So that's one way, is, you know, encouraging people to slowly move up that ladder if they have the patience to do so. And we have ended up with some great folks here in DC, amazing leaders of color. You know, you said you spoke to Chill, Maria Goyones at Woolly Mammoth, and now we've got Stephanie, who's running Baltimore Center Stage just north of us, and we've got Raymond Caldwell, Theater Alliance. That it just so happened in the last couple of years, those top positions have opened up, and we've had these amazing artists of color come forward. So we're super fortunate around here, and I can't wait to see what comes of all of these leaders in the next couple of years. But, you know, okay, that cycle has happened, and that's probably going to be the State of the Union for the next 5 to 10 years, right? So what about everybody else? Like, how can we facilitate creation outside of those structures, right? So I I'm a big proponent of the NEA needs to be way, way more funded. Like one of the reasons that we don't have as much non-commercial theater as say the UK is that they subsidize the arts.
Yeah.
And the arts is the emotion of a society. It is the intelligence of a society. So we need to be doing that. Obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, so we have some bigger problems to worry about right this second. But big picture, people are going to have things to say about this time. And we need to create the structures and put the money in place so that the artists can do that. And I feel like that's the next big thing that we can do is find ways to facilitate the journey, because the ideas are there. You know, idea is not constrained by race or gender or experience. It's there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's slowly creeping out now, kind of the artistic society reflecting back onto the real world, what it looks like. I mean, I heard that Grey's Anatomy is trying to come back soon and have the COVID-19 pandemic be the center of their next season. And you know, so I feel like
I saw Debbie Allen posted something on her Instagram.
Oh man,
she's one of the producers, and she was walking back onto set, so they're doing it.
Yeah, so it's coming. You know, we're definitely there, but it's, you know, you then think about that team, right? So you think about the producing team for that, and you know, you hope that, and I think Grace has done a pretty good job of it just because it's Shonda Rhimes and, you know, she has this in the forefront of her mind. But, you know, and I also heard that Christina Yang is coming back, and I was like, oh my gosh.
Don't get me excited because I love her.
And so, you know, we've had her on the show, and there are people of color on that show, but how are we, and it's definitely, again, not looking for a solution, but just a discussion about it. But how do we make sure that when these stories are told, that it's not, you know, as a writer, as two producers, like how do we help make sure that it's not whitewashed, you know, that it's not, okay, the only people that helped a lot and did this, and this is the story we're going to tell is, you know, John and Sally from Maine, like help their community, you know, like you know, how do we make sure that there are stories about the Chinese and Chinese American people who had small businesses that were kind of decimated by prejudice and hate? And how do we talk about, you know, the increase in the Black and Latino communities, you know, them being more greatly affected by it than white communities, you know? And so, yeah.
I mean, you've got to follow the dollars, right? Like, speaking productorially and not artistically. Like, if you want to directly influence what is being made, you have to hit people where it matters in the business world, and that's the dollars, you know? So you could go and kill a few brain cells and see, you know, the 5th Fast and Furious movie.
Oh my God.
Or
there's so many.
There's so many. Or you could judiciously use your dollars to see a film or a play or a concert by whatever of someone that represents what you want to see, you know? And I think this even goes beyond concerns about representation. But like, sometimes I'll flip through the channels, right? Or we're looking for a movie to go see that weekend. And I just go, how has this much garbage been greenlit? Like, the people who are signing these things, are you high? Because I don't know how this got greenlit.
Because you even look at it, you even think about commercials too. Like all the commercials that come out that are like steeped in controversy about like whatever racial thing or community item that they've decided to violate, you know, that wasn't like some random person at Dove Soap was like, I'm going to do this commercial today, and that's how it happened. Like levels and levels and levels of people and budgets and production have all gone through a process and said yes, and here we are. So
here we are.
It's like, yeah, it is strange.
I'm going to bet you that those people who were making those decisions, in the case that I think you're referring to with the soap, I'm betting all those people were white. Or the vast majority of those people who had to sign off on it, like, because you don't have the diversity to see when there's going to be a problem.
Right. And the thing is, it's like people talk about, you know, producer, and this is a pretty good assumption, but like that producers are rich people, right? Producers are people that have a lot of money to throw at a project to create because it's like an investment. Like when it makes money, they make money back, or whoever group of people like who are investors do. Now, speaking directly to our kind of white gatekeepers and white allies at that level, I feel like, to be a producer, the man behind the curtain is that not everybody is a rich person. They just know how to talk to rich people and get money from them. And so how can our white allies kind of help boost up people who are of color or BIPOC or LGBTQ plus who are excited to produce? It's that making connections thing. So it's like, I don't have to be Kevin McCullum, but if I'm Kevin McCullum's assistant for a project, I meet all the people that Kevin McCullum meets.
Right. Yeah.
And then eventually I become a producer like that. So how do we encourage our allies to be more inclusive in that sense? Like, if they meet somebody at a CTI and is like, oh, like this person seems really enthusiastic, I don't know where I'm going with this, but just like, how do they help
I hear
that?
you. Yeah. I mean, I feel like, and I do think this is not always true, but there's a lot in the entertainment industry that is like, okay, I'm this producer and I've got this empire of shows. And, when I started and I wasn't big and powerful, this person helped me with financing, and this person was my go-to director, and this person was my go-to cinematographer or whatever. And so it's like people rise in these little pods. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Like if you all worked hard and worked together, like good on you that you all rose together. But once you have achieved a certain level of power, like when does it become your responsibility to look beyond your pod and go, okay, I could hire so-and-so asked me for a job for their nephew that's right out of film school, and they're totally willing to do it, and I know they'll work for cheap. And that requires no work on your part. All you have to do is say yes. And that makes sense. Like, I get it, right? There's so many things to worry about. If it can just be handed to you, awesome. But you could also go, you know what? I should actually do some outreach and, look for 3 interns or PAs on that level and put in the 5 seconds of work on the internet it will take to post something and let it be in the world for a week. And you'll get 100, 200, 300 people who will submit because the internet is fast. And find someone who needs that little leg up, not because they lack the skill, but because that door of opportunity isn't open to them because their aunt or uncle isn't so-and-so who knows you.
Right.
And I feel like that's a thing that just, they have to be aware that that's in their power and be willing to do it, because the way this whole thing is structured, it's all someone at the top pulling the next person up. No one just comes out of nowhere. I know Hollywood likes to make it sound like that.
Yeah,
but,
like, oh, this amazing talent.
Right, this amazing talent who's, 25 and gorgeous, and they've just appeared out of nowhere. Like, they just pop fully created from the earth. Like, no, like, someone, they probably took some acting classes, and then they found an agent, and then they did a bunch of background work. Like, one of my favorite games is looking for people who were not famous yet in old movies.
Yeah.
Like, personal favorite is B.D. Wong in Karate Kid 2.
Oh my gosh, that's right.
He's got like that one-line flyby where he gives them a flyer to a party or something.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's B.D. Wong, So it's like, there was someone who gave him that opportunity that let him show what he could do that leads to the next, that leads to the next. But at each step, someone has to be willing to open that door.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the education part of like, we just need y'all to open some doors.
Right. And Chill mentioned something, and it's very similar to what you're talking about, but he called it a circle of friends network. Like, people like to hire their friends. And that's true. Yeah. I do, you do, like, obviously. Sure. But it turns out that, but it turns out the people who are in positions of power that we're talking about are white. So their circles of friends are most likely mostly white. And so it's like, how do we find ways to mesh these networks, whether it be through opportunities to create together or just like, well, when the world was open, like conferences, like, to go and meet people and things like that. So like, how do we get these friend networks to mesh? Or even if you know about people and have heard about people, how can people be more willing to give a chance to those that they might have heard of and heard positive things about, but have never worked with before,
Right. Well, and the reverse circle of friends is also part of that problem, right? Because there's that meme or whatever that says, justice isn't like pie. If you give away some justice, it doesn't mean you have less. Unfortunately, in this business, to a degree, when you give away a job, someone else is not getting it. So the people who have the power to make that call, need to be ready to navigate that, because I think if the person who was passed over understands the situation, hopefully they're cool and they get it, and you know what, they're going to apply for another thing and it'll be fine. But if that is part of your circle of friends and they expected it, now we're talking about white privilege, right? Is that the expectation that you would pull them up, and then you didn't, now you've got a thing you've got to deal with. So that's real too. You take that down to, elementary school playground level stuff, like, well, you didn't put me on first base. I wanted to be on first base. Well, so-and-so, and just, it becomes stupid.
But I mean, if you break it down like that, that's where it came from, like we were raised that way, like we're people and that's what people do. And, it's
right. And looking out for your friends is not a bad trait.
Right. Exactly. It's just that now being willing to make new friends is the thing, and not a lot of people do.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's it. Yeah, it's an interesting concept. Just like how do we encourage people to work across the aisle, like to get other people into the fold. And I will say that CTI they do a very good job of that. Like I would say when I took that intensive, they really try to make sure that people are meeting people. They give people access to the alumni database after they finish. And, that's just an open thread where people can talk all day long about what they do. But even in that course, I know that they're trying really hard to show diversity and equity and inclusion. But I would say in that 3-day weekend, I saw one producer of color. And like, thank goodness it was a producer of color who was a woman. But it was like, one. And these were like 2019. So these were like the producers of like Oklahoma and Be More Chill and, not Hamilton, but just, and all of the shows that were on Broadway at that time, or to come out in the coming year. Out of all of these people that I saw for like a 72-hour period, that's a lot of effing time. There was one, and she was very nice. Akia was her name, but it was like one. And she even was like sparsely working, like not even sparsely working, but sparsely producing. And all of her stories had to do with, luckily for her, white allies who had opened the door for her, which is awesome. So it's kind of like, now the next question is, how do we and to expect is the wrong action verb, but like, how do we encourage our now colleagues of color to help encourage their allies to open the door to other people like us,
Right.
So,
and like she's paying it forward in that way.
Right. And she seemed like she's very willing to do that. I got her information, but I didn't have any time to follow up with her. But I feel like if I was to reach out to her today, she'd be like, oh yeah, totally. Thank goodness. Like she seemed like one of those people, but there are a lot that aren't. There are a lot that aren't, which is also unfortunate because I want to say one thing I want to encourage people through these web shows is, if you are a person of color watching this show, be more cooperative if you can be, and try to encourage your own community to move up, because there's been I don't know if this is a colonialism thing, but like we've been like encouraged to compete against each other, and that's,
I feel like that's just American, unfortunately.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, it's like, being part of the group that's trying to move up, it's not productive and this is definitely something that's been talked about in the racial fight that's happening right now. It's not productive to attack each other, so many things to
Well, I
figure
had
out.
friends say recently, and I loved it because I was having a moment of imposter syndrome myself when we were talking. And he said, you know what? You just need to like go into the meeting or whatever it is and pretend that you're a mediocre white guy. Go in with the confidence of a mediocre white guy. And I was like, that's actually very good. Because somehow, whether it's cultural, whether it's societal or colonialist, like so many artists of color and artists in general, we're taught like you're lucky to be here at all. You're lucky to have a job at all. You're lucky to be getting paid at all. And it makes you sort of like unwilling to ask for more.
Right.
And you can't get into that producerial, that upper tier of people, because those all they do is ask. They say, I need this, I need that. Come on, like you want to be a part of this. Like that's part of that upper hustle, right? Is getting people excited. But if you can't have the confidence of a mediocre white guy, how are you going to sell yourself, sell the project, all of those things? It's undoing.
And also the idea that because sometimes they are mediocre white guys, that their threshold for failure is huge. Like, they and this came up in the last conversation. It was like, there's some kind of unwritten, unspoken leeway where these people that they can fail spectacularly, like very expensive failures, very big, like, basically set the world on fire. And people are like, cool, so what are we going to work on together next? But with people like us, it's like, if you fail once, if it's even like, leaving a name off of a poster, they're like, oh, that's the guy who like leaves people off of posters, like don't really work with him. So,
well, I mean, we do have a president that said he could shoot people on Fifth Avenue and everyone would be fine. And a lot of people are not alive right now. So it's proven to be true, unfortunately. And I've heard that about so many things. Like the women in Hollywood, if you ever watch any of those interviews, the number of them that say they felt so much pressure that if their project failed, they were never going to direct again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because it's that like idea of tokenism. Yeah, it's like almost a weird tokenism of like, if you do well, then other people like you will get the opportunity. But if you don't do well,
women are not bad directors, or maybe Asian people are not bad actors, or maybe this Hispanic person, like maybe a Hispanic person can lead a show. Like, but if that one fails, it's like they're not willing to give it another chance when there's how many projects out there of mediocre white guys that bomb.
Yeah. I mean, you look at like you said earlier, you look at cable, like commercial cable, and there's like 1,000 channels, and that's like all of these TV channels that all have TV shows, and like who is like, where is all this work coming from? Who's greenlighting all of this work? And like, I'll admit, like, even I have my guilty pleasure of watching the Real Housewives franchise, but like, that's like a group of semi-mediocre white women making mistakes. And I mean, let's call it what it is, the Kardashians. And you're just like, this is making millions and millions of dollars for these people. And all they're doing is sitting on their sofas, typing away on their phones. Like,
well, and it's because you're watching it.
Right.
So there's that game too, right? It's like, oh, well, this is just my one or two guilty pleasures.
Right. But then you end up watching all the very
machine, right?
Exactly.
Like, it's the problem.
Like, and it's like a vicious cycle, right? To stay, because I feel like the nature of in being a writer, also being a producer, and just being in theater in general, like you have to keep your pulse on, or keep your finger on the pulse of pop culture and what's happening. Right. And so if you don't understand a reference, like Kanye's crazy, then people are like, well, do we even want to hire this person? Because they don't even know what that means.
They don't know what's up.
Right. So how are you going to be a producer who, puts on relevant work that makes sense to the societal norms at that moment? It's such a vicious cycle, but we're hopefully working on it. But
little by little.
Little by little.
Hey, it's JD from the Hyman Podcast. I created this podcast to have hard conversations. Conversations that make us human but are also wildly uncomfortable. Conversations that help give voice to the voiceless and to the marginalized. Now you can listen to the entire first season on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Consider this your personal invitation to join the conversation.
So, given all of that, and I asked you this question before we started the interview, but everybody, we've all gotten a lot of advice in life and our careers. And so was there ever a piece of advice that you got that you thought was like, this is great, I'm going to follow that, and it just didn't work out the way you thought it would? And if so, how would you modify that piece of advice for the next person to hopefully make them successmesuccessful at that? And we don't have to name people. So if it was a bad advice, we could be like,
all good. I mean, I think it kind of goes back early to that story I was telling, I think, at the beginning of the interview, that my parents told me that being an artist was not practical. And I think about all of the years I lost trying to be practical.
Yeah.
And I'd get 10 years back if I had just said, screw it, like I did, when I got to my late 20s and said, this is what will make me happy, let's go for it. And I wouldn't, so this is where I get into arguments with my friends who are parents. I actually don't believe in blind encouragement. For example, let's say little Jennifer is a singer, wants to be a singer, and she's, 8, but she's awful. So a lot of parents will just encourage her because she's trying, and okay, good.
Yeah.
I'm personally a believer in if they're not good, don't tell them that. You can share with them what they can work on. You can share with them what could be better if you have the means. You seem to like singing. Do you want to take some lessons? There's lots of ways to encourage it. But if someone is really, truly bad at something, I'd want to be told so I could stop wasting the energy and focus on what I'm really, truly good at. And if you tell someone that you don't think they're good, but they're truly passionate about it, truly, truly passionate, they will work harder and get better. So either way it forks off is good. Either they go and find something that they're good at, or they work harder and get better. Right. I just don't think the blind lies don't work, and the flat out discouragement doesn't work. There's a whole lot of gray area. The world is a gray place.
Yeah, because it's you wouldn't hire a doctor. You wouldn't pick a doctor who was just okay, you wouldn't hire a painter who paints with the colors that you didn't tell them to use, stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah. So it's what we all want, I think, is to figure out how to be our best selves. And lying to someone about their abilities or their skill set is not helping them be their best selves.
It's how you get a Donald Trump. Let's be honest.
True story.
And if people watching have not read that book that Mary Trump has written, it is wild. So I would say definitely if you can. It's only $16 actually on Amazon. So, but it just was case in point of what you're talking about. It was blindly encouraging a child into something that they think they're good at, but they're terrible at. And so it just builds this persona.
Not encouraging him to get better.
Right. And it just builds this persona.
Just blind that you're good.
Exactly. And that's why, and of course we can use it because he's such a relevant example of it, obviously, but they've created this person who sees no wrong, thinks they're not wrong, thinks whatever they do is the greatest thing in the world. And knows how to turn off criticism.
Yeah.
And
I feel no sense of self-reflection, which we all
need. Right. And I feel in the arts and producing, that's so important, to be able to take feedback well, to be able to hear people's concerns. What I tell people about being producer is it is getting to be a professional at getting yelled at, because producers always get yelled at, whether it's good or bad or whatever. You're the housing of all of the complaints. It all comes back to you. So, because I remember in the early days of me doing this, I would get so butthurt if I'd hear one thing, and like, then we move up and you learn. But I get complaints all the time now, and I'm just like, you live, and it's you just got to figure out how to either solve it, how to resolve it, or how to not resolve it, but agree to disagree, or whichever.
Yeah.
And
So discern the real complaints from complaints.
Yeah, right. Complaints from gossip, I guess, would be what it would be. So, do you ever have direct say in the production team that produces your new work, or do you kind of let that run its own course?
I did when I produced that Fringe show, obviously. As a stage manager, that is not part of my realm of purview. As a writer, and I had the show in Hawaii, and then I've had 2 full-length pieces produced here in DC in the last several years. I did have some say in those parts. I knew both directors, so that helped. But I don't particularly feel in need as a writer. I have directed, but I am not a writer-director. I don't have any interest in directing my own writing.
Right.
I believe in that outside eye as a writer. Like the directors, when I work with them, they tell me things I would never find on my own. And then the actors arrive and they tell me things I would never have caught. So I'm very much I like to stay in my lane. I do like to have sign off of final approval. So really my last 2 plays are ethnically specific in casting. So in those cases, like I would want sign off just to make sure that like they didn't cast all white people when the characters are supposed to be Latina, that sort of thing, just to check. But I'm fairly hands off. Happy to give feedback when it's asked for, but I like to let it run its course. Part of the journey of the writer is letting it go, right? And letting it go into someone's hands and be what it's going to be for them. Unlike a movie, because movies are, when they're done, they're finite and that's it. They're filmed, they're in the can. Yeah. But, this reading will be different than that production, which will be different than the next production, and onward until forever. I mean, I just saw a posting about that production of Godspell at the Berkshires. It's the first equity sanctioned production of a musical since the pandemic. And Godspell's an old show. Yeah. And it's kind of corny and like a little too hippity-dippity for my taste. But they've taken the thing and spun it and, set it in pandemic times. And cool, like this is the incarnation of that play for now. Yeah. And I think if you're clinging too tightly as a writer, you're not allowing it to evolve. It's like I've sent my kid to college, but I'm going to live in the bunk above you just to make sure that things stay the same. That's not healthy. Don't do that.
Oh my God, that would be so weird. So that just brings up a whole other thing that like definitely, we're going to circle back and have another conversation soon, because there's just like that idea of like creative license as a production team, like that's definitely a topic you talk about later. Like, for like chorus line, you do chorus line and you have to do the choreography, but like, I think it was Signature Theater that was like, they kind of went back and forth with the rights people and changed it and were able to do it. So, things like that, but that's a story for another day. But we are coming up on our time. So tell us a little bit about like what's coming up for you this fall and how can people follow your work?
I've got a couple things that I'm waiting to hear on that I don't know for sure yet, so I can't talk about those. The big thing that's happening is working on the play rewrites. I've had a reading in August of that play and continuing to do some rewrites there. I am working on a musical, which is going through a big rewrite right now, and then I have a contact that I want to get one more set of notes, and then we want to do a workshop sometime in fall. Nice. Sort of thinking through those logistics. I was able to get a grant, so I have a little bit of money to actually pay some people properly, so that's good. But the big project for me this fall is the free theater, actually, that we were talking about earlier. Normally, we would do a show in December, which would mean starting to rehearse in September. So we don't know with everything.
Sure.
Yeah, we went ahead and booked the rights, and then it didn't get better, the situation with COVID. And we were, sort of constantly talking to our students and polling our parents through the summer. And it didn't feel like we should commit to that.
Gotcha.
we didn't know if we'd have enough time to rehearse, right? So we ended up calling off the show, which is unfortunate. But what we've done instead is we're setting up a bunch of education. So like I said, this is a baby company, so we're like diving into the deep end of the pool here. But we did a directing boot camp in the summer, which was 40 hours of education online for student directors. And the reason we're called the Free Theater is because we actually are free. No one pays to take our classes.
That's incredible.
Which is pretty awesome. The company was founded by high schoolers, and that was one of the major tenets they felt strongly about. Like, even these high school students were like, theater is expensive, taking singing and dance classes is expensive, and it screws over the people who can't afford it. So we want our program to be free. So that's what we do. So we offered 40 hours of directing training to these directors, like 15, 16 directors over the summer. And we're doing it in fall with a whole slate of classes. So we have dance, we have acting, we have singing, we've got one-on-one stuff, we've got group stuff, we've got workshops for some of the leadership stuff. So we have choreography and stage management and playwriting and music directing, all leading up to a digital recital in the beginning of December. So that's our big project. So I'm the production manager, so I'm coordinating all of the students and making sure schedules and teachers and all of that on top of the classes that I'm actually teaching. So, we'll find out some of the limits of creatively what we can do. We're all learning about education on Zoom. All the students are going through it, all the teachers are going through it. So we're learning that, and then we're going to have a chance to experiment with performance. The last couple of weeks, all of the session 3 classes are putting together performance pieces for Zoom, and they're going to have kind of free reign to do what they want to do. So if they want to shoot it live, we'll shoot it live. If they want to record it and edit it together and then we play it, that's what we'll do. So we'll see how it goes. It's all we're out at the open sea now, and who knows what will happen.
It's all a big game of experimentation, and I'm just glad to see that we're, for the most part, people that I'm seeing are taking advantage of the time and taking advantage of experimenting and seeing what happens, because you don't know, there's no right answer right now. So just do it and we'll see from there. So, and what's the website for the Free Theater so people know?
The website for the Free Theater is www.thefreetheater.org. The has to be in the front, and it's an org.org.
And do you have a website as well for you?
I do. I'm at stagewoozle.com. Stage Woozle, like Heffalumps and Woozles from Winnie the Pooh.
Amazing. We'll put it all in the comments and things below so people can see that. So thank you so much, Hope, for your time today. This was awesome. Like, again, just like the last interview, I learned so much about you and where you've come from. And hopefully we'll have you back on to talk more about other things. But I really appreciate you being part of this new thing we're trying to do. So,
and keep making new things.
Yes, we got to keep making new things, because that's life. So, all right. Well, I will see you next time. All right. Thank you for having
me. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Producing While Asian podcast. Our theme song was created by Luckstock. We are produced by Press Play Podcast, and the show is edited by Michael Santos Sandoval. If you have a moment, please leave a review and a rating, and be sure to send us any topic ideas you have to producingwhileasian@gmail.com. To follow us, stay updated, and read our blog, visit www.producingwhileasian.com. We hope you join us again soon.